Welcome to Books Boys, live from the Grand Library, TheDean and PJ. He's PJ.
Hello there.
I'm TheDean, and we are the Books Boys.
The one and only.
There we go. I was waiting for it. This is the Books Boys show. Get it? Buy it? Books.
Books.
Now, I'm accompanied by little Alfred. PJ's in a Italian wilderness, accompanied by some crickets, which we may hear from time to time.
We are sponsored today by Crickets Love Billy Shakespeare. And
So-
it's just, yes, in Italy.
Unfortunately, that
So we
might
find
be
ourselves in-
something today.
We find ourselves in unusual circumstances. I am battling the sounds of lovely crickets, screaming kids in a summer camp, and the unusual, almost Gabriel Garcia Marquez-esque heat that is in Italy right now. In other words, I'm in a summer camp, and it's a bit difficult doing this bit. Well, of course, we had to do it, Dean and I. We put our heads to it, like Churchill and Stalin and co., and we used our powers for better reasons than them to create this beautiful episode for you.
That's it. We're
And
gonna
in fact,
do our best.
In fact, we put so much effort into it that we actually talked about exactly 2 hours yesterday, as if it were a little prequel.
Yeah,
for the
we
podcast.
did.
We had it extra ready for you. We could have just recorded that, but no, we had to do it now. That's
We had
fine.
to warm up the vocal cords, for 2 hours.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. So, Dean, how has the books month of June been for you?
And I've read a lot of books, which we'll get to. The month's been crazy because I went to a lot of concerts. I went to see everything from Shwadi Wadi to Iron Maiden, and then I went to Madrid and I visited I saw Los del Rio. I did the Macarena on a fake beach in a car park in Madrid with the actual band from the song. And I saw a whole load of Spanish bands from the 90s, and I got overheated at 40 degrees and crazy stuff. So.
Oh, it's really hot here. Just so you listeners, you might be confused. I am living in Dresden, but I'm just here for a month working in a summer camp. And it's very nice, but it is extremely hot. And, so it's Sweaty Books Boys.
It's crazy because you've moved to Germany and now to Italy. Our Playboys co-host Alex has gone to America. Robert from the Dark Place Dreamers show on our Patreon, he's just moved to London. Mireia, that I've done some poetry pals and some Lorca plays with, she's just moved back to Spain. I'm the only person stuck here in flipping Northern Ireland, But to be fair, I did visit Spain for a couple of days, and I'm going back for a week and a half in July for some more concerts and tour around a few different cities. So that'd be nice. So PJ, I think PJ that I found out what books are. Someone gave me a definition that it was a long rectangular object, hard on both sides, and in the middle it had leaf-like things that you could flip. You could flip these little square leaf-like things, and they would have pictures or words on them. So I thought I had a book, and I think I've got one here, and it says on the front photo album. Is this the right thing?
Well, does it tell a story? Is it written by someone? Did it win a Nobel Prize?
No, it's just got photo album on the front and then just pictures. There's no other text, so the pictures tell a very jumbled story.
I think it might be Haruki Murakami's latest postmodern novel, where he doesn't write his name on it. You know what I mean?
It could be.
I'm not sure.
It could be.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's very confusing. I'm still looking through the bathroom section, toilet roads, and trying to understand if it's Shakespeare or Wilkie Collins I'm reading.
Yeah.
It's difficult. The reading is difficult.
You mentioned our good old friend Dickens' Deputy.
Oh,
I've got something to say about him in a second. But I
can already guess that you have nothing bad to say about.
Not a bad word to say, but I'm just going to say up front. We're doing the show under technical difficulties today, so if there's background noise or we've got to do a lot of editing, if the show's a bit shorter than usual, we're doing our best, chaps.
So we're doing it. We're doing it for the kids. We're doing it for the kids. We want to do this.
Get it?
So yeah,
buy it. Books. I don't know why I said that. That's actually not helpful. So the first book I read was a Wilkie Collins book called Armadale. It's considered his fourth great novel after The Moonstone, The Woman in White, and No Name. No Name, which we reviewed
and
before.
You've read them all now, haven't you?
Yeah, I've read the four greats anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the thing about Armadale, right? I mean, it's very long. It's like 700 pages of very small text, margin to margin. Okay. I think in like a normal size paperback, this would be over 1,000 pages. Okay, it's very. Well,
I thought I was reading a long book. And just to give some clarity for your listeners, if you don't remember, as you said, Dean, Wilkie Collins is Dickens' friend, but also kind of like his almost student. He even co-wrote with Dickens some plays and stories.
Yeah,
and supposedly he imitates up to some extent his master's style, right? At least at the beginning. I mean,
he is distinct but similar, you know.
Okay, yeah.
So Dickens' deputy, good old Wilkie Collins, and this book's called Armadale. Okay, so it's about a chap, Alan Armadale, and it's also about a second chap, Alan Armadale. So what happens is, I mean, there's a lot of preamble at the beginning that isn't really that important. But basically, there's a doctor, a guy arrives at this town and he needs a doctor, and he asks, I want to sign my will, and he has to just dictate this letter in secret, and his wife isn't allowed to hear the letter, and they bring in a guy to be a witness, and the guy is really harsh with them, and they say, do you mind if the lady leaves the room? Will you excuse me? And he says things like, no, sir, I will not excuse you. What right have I given to you to think me wanting in gentleness and consideration towards anyone? I do not need to excuse you. So there's a lot of this Victorian, not nonsense, which I love. So I'm loving the book from the beginning.
Nice.
But basically what happens is this guy's, there's a quick story about the father. Basically, in order to kind of screw someone out of their inheritance, they adopt someone else, and now there's two people called Alan Armadale, and there's a kind of revenge thing. They're not really important. What's important is the children who both take on their name and are also both Alan Armadale. So it's the children's story that we're looking at.
It reminds me of 100 Years of Solitude by Marcus, because that's what he does. He uses two. At the end, even three names, I think, that continuously kind of repeat, and then they kind of reflect back on the ancestors. Yeah. Just a little side note, yeah.
There's a bit with the dads, like they go to get married, and then the wrong one gets married, and he's like, haha, I've stolen your wife because I have the same name as you. And, you've stolen my inheritance, but I've stolen your wife, and all this kind of stuff,
And doesn't Wilkie Collins talk a lot about inheritance, and also like kind of like the errors of inheritance and like things going wrong and children left?
That's this entire book, basically.
Yeah.
So
talks a lot about that.
This one, Alan Armadale, takes on a different name because he doesn't want that name, and he calls himself Ozias Midwinter. And he had a rough upbringing, and he was like living out in the streets and living out in the countryside with this old guy who would make him work, and he would give him some food, but he would also beat him and beat the dogs as well. And it's kind of a sad upbringing. And then there's the posh Alan Armadale, who's living with his mum and a teacher called Mr. Brock. And they just have a nice time. And he's like, he's just this country squire, and he's this nice gentleman. He goes around, he's being nice to everyone. And he thinks, life is just roses, And his mum dies and he's sad. And then they say, oh, by the way, you just inherited like this big house. So off you go. And he's like, well, there's people living in that house. I'll give them a few months to get their things in order. Like, it's nothing to me. I'm not in any hurry for the money. I'm not in any hurry for the house. I'm just a grand old chap having a good time in life, And it just so happens that who turns up in the town but Ozias Midwinter, the other Alan Armadale. And on the mother's deathbed, she said, there's this kind of curse, never let him meet his namesake. That's the theme of the book, never let them meet. And Mr. Brock tries to stop them meeting. But of course, they meet. And they become the best of friends, fast friends, and off they go. No one's ever been friends with Ozias before. He's had a really hard life.
Hold on, do they know that they got the same name, or no, not really?
The real Alan Armadale.
One of them knows.
One of them knows. Ozias Midwinter knows. So you originally think, okay, he's the bad guy here. He's going to try to, they're trying to keep them apart. It's not going to work. He's going to be after the inheritance and everything. No, they're both just great guys.
Okay.
And he says, I don't want him to know because he's going to be scared of me, and I want to protect his interests, and I'm going to be his best friend. And when he goes to the house, I'll work for him as his steward, and we'll all be happy together. And he He confesses it all to Mr. Brock. He says, I want to let you know, I'm not keeping any secrets. I'm going to tell you, but I don't think we should tell Alan. And Mr. Brock agrees. And that's it. They're going to be best friends, and he's going to work for him. And there's no villainy at all.
I mean, it almost sounds PG Woodhouseian now, but I mean, I can't be just, happy glory. This is Victorian realism.
Well, exactly.
So something happens.
Ozias is afraid of the curse, and there's these dreams and visions that they have of like the statue falls over, and then one of them, he loses his money and dies, and all this kind of stuff. So he's terrified of these visions. And Mr. Brock keeps saying, like, these visions, these dreams, they're not Christian. Just forget about them, But there is a villain in the book. There's a Miss Gwilt. So there's a pretty lady on the estate. She lives in the kind of outhouse, like the servants' kind of the lodge keepers' quarters or whatever, something, on the grounds. And Alan Armadale likes her, and he wants to get with her. And that's fine, except her teacher or governess is actually this girl called Miss Gwilt. And Miss Gwilt knows all about the Alan Armadales and things like that. And she's the villain of the piece.
The plot thickens.
Yeah. So she's trying to convince Alan to marry her for money because she was the servant of the mother of the original Alan from the previous generation. And there's all these tie-ins, right? So she wants the money. Slight spoiler, but in the end, actually, I'm going to say this. I'm not going to say anything that happens in the last quarter of the book. So any spoilers I give will only be like up to the mid kind of point anyway. Okay, but it's a very long book, so I have to say something. She ends up marrying the wrong one again, because he can't put Ozias Midwinter on the wedding papers. He has to put his real name, which is Alan Armadale.
All right. Yeah,
and then she says, well, I can lose him in another country, go back home, kill the other one, and pretend to be his widow with a marriage certificate to prove it. So she becomes a murderess.
Oh, my Lord, okay.
Or at least she plans to become a murderess. I'm not going to say that all works out. The plot thickens and thickens and thickens. But it's brilliant.
Now sounds very dark.
Yeah. I love the guy because the Alan Armadale, they say to him things like, it's really difficult managing a house and managing your servants and all this kind of stuff. So he meets the servant girl and he says, everyone says it's very difficult to manage servants. I find it very easy. And it turns out, here's what he says to her. You shall stop here. Don't be afraid. You'll be a good girl, Susan. You'll wear smart little caps and aprons and bright ribbons, and you'll look nice and pretty and dust the furniture. Off you go. And he says, it's easy.
Oh, Lord.
Handling servants is very easy. You just tell them to look pretty and get a duster. And,
And I've got a question. Do Dickens and Collins, do they, is that a kind of a criticism of the machismo of the era? Or do you think it generally just Dickens and Wood Collins didn't realize that, despite their virtues, they still have the flaw of being macho man?
I don't know. I think Dickens is maybe a little bit more conscious sometimes than Wilkie Collins. I think Wilkie Collins wrote this thinking this is just a nice guy. I don't think he was making a social commentary on that.
Okay, but he is a product. He's a product of his time, so he can't really judge. Nowadays, we'd be shocked. But
nowadays would be shocked.
Like a great. Sometimes when I hear about these Victorian novels, I think, right, are they just drinking teacups all day? Sorry, sometimes. I do like the sound of this novel. It was all twist and even. I like the beginning. It sounds funny, and then it sounds dark.
There's other twists. There's Mother Oldershaw, who runs a criminal kind of syndicate, and she's telling Miss Gwilt what to do because she was her money. And there's a guy who loves Miss Gwilt, even though he knows she doesn't love him back, and she wants to marry someone else. And he says, even if I want to do anything I can for her, even if I'm going to die within 24 hours, he's just so in love, he doesn't care. He's completely sacrificed to her. There's a bit where there's a dodgy doctor. They end up locked in an insane asylum at one night. They're in they go to Italy or to some other country at one point. The plot goes everywhere.
So it doesn't follow the Anna Karenina method. It generally is. It's not a culture manual in a short story. It's generally.
It's a long story.
It's a long story. Oh Lord!
It's a long story, and none of it is wasted. But you actually end up liking most of the. Now, the only thing is the style is weird. It starts with narration, then it turns into letters, epistolary. Then it turns into Miss Gwilt's diary for about 50% of it, and then it changes back. So Wilkie Collins does this, where he does, puts in letters and diary extracts, and it's all over the place. But the story is flipping fantastic.
Oh, I like that. That sounds sounds like postmodern. Wouldn't expect that of that era. Yeah. I've actually thought of a question we could ask each other for Books Boys, and it's generally because we talk about the plots and what we love and all that. But if someone asks us, why should I read this book? One reason. I mean, why would you read this book? Can you give me one reason? That you've got many reasons, but what's the main reason one should definitely read this book?
I'll tell you why. Because despite its length, it goes quickly. I was addicted to it, and it's fun, and the characters are so likable. Obviously, yes, there is a villain, but the main characters are, you completely swerved because you think the Alan Armadales are going to be opposed to each other, and they're not. They're just both great guys, and it's nice. It made me happy.
Wow, nice. Okay, you sold me in this one.
Good,
despite its length.
Yeah. So the next book then I'll get to real quick. I'm going to do this one quickly because I think that myself, yourself, Alfred, the listeners, everyone is sick of hearing about Balzac. Okay. So
I was just about to say, take your time, but I'm not sure if necessary we need to get into this for Balzac.
No, I'm going to be as quick with these because I'm so done. And I looked at this last Balzac.
Bit to the there's several Balzac societies around the world. We just want to say to them, we do love the chap, but like we have gone a bit.
We have. I've read way too much. I don't know how this happened. I just took a whole load of them from the library, and I just thought, goodness, there's way too many.
He's got a big selection. He's got a big selection of books. I mean, few people have written as much as Balzac.
Yeah,
and this is what happens when you just stay in bed all night writing. I mean, Yeah. I mean, exchange. He died pretty young. I mean, I'm not sure if I want to exchange writing a lot for dying young.
No. So this book is called The History of the 13, and it's about 400 pages, and it's split in two. So it's actually two 200-page short novels, okay? And I'll just spend 2 minutes on each. There's really no need to go into them. But the first one is called...
of course, part of the human comedy.
Yes,
right?
Of course. So the first one is Chief of the Deverance. It's this chap, Fergus. But it has some nice quotes in it. I'm going to start with a quote. It's not integral to the plot, but I just like it. The police, my dear boy, is the most incompetent thing in the world, and the government is the most feeble of all in matters concerning individuals. Neither the police nor the government can read hearts. That which might be reasonably asked of them is to search for the causes of an act. Now, the government and the police are eminently unfitted for this task. They lack essentially that personal interest which reveals all to him who has need of knowing all. So look, this contains, almost in the Anna Karenina style, although it's very short, it's only 200 pages in total, just these little pieces about government, about politics, about police, about judiciary. It's a very politicizing, opinionated book. Okay. And it's not always strictly relevant to the plot, but there's some of that. So basically, what happens?
Does it hold the candle to old pair Goriot?
Well, you tell me, because the main character basically is a chap, that in this society, right, all these women are out having affairs and things, and he sees one woman and he says she's the only one who's not having an affair on her husband, and therefore I love her and I want her to have an affair with me. So he chooses the hardest one to get, and you feel bad for the husband.
I'm very amused because I don't think Balzac had much of a love life until right at the end of his life, where he married and then died a year later. So I'm just amused at his observations he has of women and society.
But he thinks women are very devilish. I mean, there's literally a bit here: our customs so readily teach us deception. That's his view of women. They are deceptive. But to summarize this in a 30-second thing, basically, here's what happens in the book, okay? So this guy wants to get with this woman, and we meet her husband, and her husband's in love with her, and he allows, anything. He never wants to be suspicious of her, but she starts going out a lot, and, he says, like, oh, look, I don't mind you going out, there's no problem, but you did say you weren't going out, and then immediately went out, and there's all these things where she is deceiving him, and he says, like, I feel so bad. He's gaslighting himself. He's like, there must be a reason for this. Do you want to tell me the reason? Because, like, I know you're a great person. I feel so bad. But, like, you told me you weren't going out, and then literally 10 minutes later you went out, and then you said you hadn't been out, and you lied because, like, your hat had water on it, so the rain had been on it. He's like, but you can't have tricked me. You can't have tricked me. It must have been something else. Like, maybe you had to get something from the shop. These things happen all the time. Well, and he's really trying to tell himself, like, my wife's really good. She wouldn't cheat on me. But he's having this evidence presented to him. And he's kind of like, oh, but there's got to be a reason for it. Like, my girl wouldn't do that, you know? And in the end, he feels so bad. And he brings the suspicion to his wife, and she says, I can't answer your questions. It's like, oh, no. It turns out to be innocent, actually. And it's because of this.
Give us spoilers.
Well, okay. I'm not going to say why, but there's this. Well, okay.
But you're not selling this one to me. This book doesn't sound necessarily like one I'd like to read. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, it was fun and fast, but it wasn't anything special.
Okay. I like the sound of the other one better. I mean, this sounds like it's just about a man, like just.
But there's a nice bit, right? This is ridiculous. I can't cope with this. So at the end, basically, there's a couple, and one of them, the wife dies. Because I'm sorry, this is a spoiler, but I have to say this. She dies because she caused her husband heartache by suspecting her, even though she was innocent, and she just dies from the suspicion. Like, she can't.
Sorry, say that again. Say that again. He died.
So she writes in her last letter, like, I've caused my husband to suspect me. I can't live, and she just dies of natural causes from the shock of it. This is too much. Like, it's ridiculous. I can't cope with it. I know it's a spoiler, but I think it's worth it. It's ridiculous.
Oh my god, yeah, it is worth it. I mean, because that's like a parody of everything that Victorian literature kind of maybe does a bit. You know, in a silly way. There's a lot of great things, but it does that.
There's also these quotes where they say things like, you know, a report to the present system of administration what limbo is to the Christian religion. So complaining about the bureaucracy of France and things. So there's fun things like that in it as well. And the second part, La Duchesse de Longueuil, basically, again, to give it the 1 minute summary, basically this guy goes to a monastery and he sees a nun, and he's been looking in every monastery. Okay, he's a soldier, and he's been deliberately bringing his team to every monastery he can find all over Europe. And he meets this nun that is an old duchess that he used to be in love with. And he basically says, I want you back. And they do a conversation, and she pretends not to know him. And then when he starts kind of hitting on her, she says to the Mother Superior, I do know this man. And then the Mother Superior ends the interview, right? Most of this book then takes place in like prequel, which is really bad, because the entire story happens in like the first 50 pages, and the other 2-3/4 of it is just kind of prequel. But it turns out the guy was a terrible guy. Like, at one point he kidnapped her and everything, and like got all these people, the 13, which is why it's history of the 13, to have her like tied up in a room. And then he's like, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to harm you, but I need to know that you love me, and I want to possess you. And he's really like possessive and controlling and everything. And it's like, this is a bad guy. This is not a good guy. Yeah. So basically, this is another ridiculous book. And in the beginning, the guy presents himself that he was so in love with this woman and she left him, and then it turns out like, no, he was really terrible and horrible and controlling, and literally kidnapped her at one point. So like, really not good stuff.
Right. So now, Dean, now that you've gone through coffee addicted Balzac, obviously drinking way too much and getting all hyperactive tones, I have a book to recommend that I think I must have recommended a lot of times. It is the one and only, the unique, the classic, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Mm-hmm. Now, Dean, I know you've heard about this book often.
But it's been a while.
I've heard about this book often before. It's been a while because I didn't read it. I mentioned it last month, I thought I did. But at least last month I started meditating on it again. So again, for your listeners, I started meditating on a book of verses, over 80 verses, written by Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago, a Chinese philosopher who wrote down his wisdom, who wrote down what he thinks is the path to take. Means the road in Chinese. So it's basically like the road of enlightenment, and it's considered by some, Wayne Dyer calls it the wisest book ever written. And the way he reads it, he's a philosopher I really like, on a philosopher, is that you don't read it like a book. You read it one verse, and then you generally meditate on it. Just let it.
You take like one a day, or even a couple of days.
So I just started again from. Exactly. Yes. Well, no, no, there are no rules. And that's the thing about the Tao Te Ching. The verse is the Tao Te Ching is not the road is not the road. It's a kind of the idea of like opposites. It's like if you think you know what you're doing, that's not the way either. If you think you understand this book, you don't understand. You don't really understand the Tao Te Ching. You just try to live in the present moment. But in my method, Wayne Dyer, for example, did, I think, one verse, meditated on it for 5 days, I think. But I'm going a bit more than that. That's what I did last year. I did one every week. And this time I'm going even slower. I did one a week. And then on the fourth verse, I've been meditating on it for over a month now. So literally this month, I've only meditated on one single verse. The fourth verse of the Tao Te Ching. And because the next book I'm going to talk about will be very much linked to this verse. So I'd like to read it out to you.
Okay.
And I recommend Taoism 1. Taoism comes from Tao Te Ching, but Taoism doesn't follow Lao Tzu's principles. It's that plus a new constructed religion. The Tao Te Ching is not a religion. There's no there are no gods or churches or institutions or anything like that. It's just literally what he thinks will help people. So the Tao Te Ching, here it is, verse 4.
The way is empty, used, but not used up. Deep, yes, ancestral to the 10,000 things. Blunting edge, loosing bond. Dimming light, the way is the dust of the way. Quiet, yes, and likely to endure. Whose child? Born before the gods.
So this verse teaches the concept of opening up to the abundance of the universe. And it's basically saying that the universe is like a bottle with both endings kind of open. So while there's nothing there, everything flows through it. So again, it's that idea of opposites. It's both nothing, and out of that nothing, you can take as much as you want. So it's like endless. So I'm really practicing this idea of abundance, and that Wayne Dyer practices as well. Rather than lack thinking, and I feel I have been lack thinking in up to recently, and struggling, to be honest, to open up to generosity, help even from others. And the more I meditate, that's why I stopped at verse 4. I thought 1, 2, 3, I kind of got that, but I couldn't understand verse 4. Every day, it wouldn't get into me. And then only after about 2 weeks into it, was a feeling and it made long. And I know it's different than the usual literature and stories and all that, but I do genuinely think the Tao Te Ching helped me. And I stopped because it was a routine, so I just didn't do the routine anymore. And getting back to it for my mental health and spiritual health, it has done me very well to just sit down, and I know the verse by heart now. I just feel like you can just do it any time and just practice this concept of abundance. So I'm very focused on the first 2 lines of that verse, but also the idea of that the edge is blunt, the road is dusty. Again, the idea of if you think you know something, if you think you know where your life is heading, but you don't, and it's only very natural that you should. Oh, I've got the Italian dogs here, excuse me. But the Tao Te Ching again, that's the thing about the Tao Te Ching. There we go. The Tao Te Ching practices. You practice with it that it doesn't flow always. It doesn't go the way you plan it, and you should just accept it. Because think about it. If you want everything to be perfect, you're just going to be stressed out. So, good example is the Italian dogs.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the next verses, he mentions straw dogs, but I won't jump into that. So he actually mentions dogs, the dogs that bite at you and that they're there to teach you lessons. But I'm jumping ahead now. Highly recommend it. What I do want to mention is that the Tao Te Ching is old Chinese, and there have been many translations, and they're all very beautiful because it is such a kind of poetic book, and really it's never 100% clear, even I think for Chinese people, what exactly intended to say. So my favorite edition is still the one I recommended first by Ursula Le Guin, the author of The Earth's Sea. Beautiful science fiction. remember, yes. I mean, I think this was maybe exactly a year ago I was talking about this. And Ursula Le Guin, Earthsea, I recommended it before, is very Taoist in the true sense of Taoism. It's very, she grew up, her dad was an archaeologist, and she grew up with the Tao Te Ching. And she actually, in the 90s, she decided to give her own translation or own interpretation, of Tao Te Ching. And her translation is the one that's for me most resonates with me. Slightly more poetical than the ones that are more scientifically translated, obviously. And her observations are very acute. And obviously, I recommend Wayne Dyer's commentary on the Tao Te Ching as well. Mentioned that before. So, just a book that I highly recommend to anyone. And moving on, Dean, I know we usually do one book each, but I do want to talk about the next book. Are you fine with that?
Yeah, don't worry. I did too, so go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose you did. But the reason why I want to do immediately the next book is that, yes, I haven't read a new book this month at all. I've been continuing Harry Mulisch, The Discovery of Heaven, and I still haven't finished it. So there you go. It is an amazing book I started talking about last month. Up to part 1 I talked about. It doesn't follow the Anna Karenina method, I'm afraid, Dean. It's not a short story with a big agriculture manual or maybe dog teeth cleaning instructions or something. It's generally so deep that we could just do the whole podcast on this book, even I haven't finished it yet. So for you listeners out there, if you remember, Dean, The Discovery of Heaven starts off with 2 angels talking about, and one angel intervenes in humanity. That he's literally an intervener. It's not. Harry Mulisch kind of grew up half Jewish, half Christian, and not read at the same time, and he's got a difficult history. I think I mentioned it. Dutch author, born, I believe. But born a bit before the Second World War to an Austrian dad and to a Jewish mother of German roots, I think. But in Holland. But his father, I'm afraid, kind of collaborated with the Nazis, and yes, they divorced. Yeah. Obviously, I mean, his wife was Jewish, and yeah, you got little Harry Mulisch asking, "Why did my father, do that?" And Harry Mulisch didn't. He managed to defend his son and ex-wife. So it's actually thanks to him, nevertheless, that Harry Mulisch and his mom survived the Second World War. But he didn't prevent. This I find shocking. It didn't prevent the parents of his ex-wife being sent to a concentration camp and executed. So that's something that really haunted Harry Mulisch. And he once famously said, "I am the Second World War." That's a pretty famous phrase of his, meaning that he really grew up completely divided, like Jewish family and then traitor family. And it's because he usually won, right? But all of a sudden he's got this strange mix and he doesn't know who he even is. And he feels like a stranger. He said he feels like a stranger in Holland because he's not even properly Dutch, but he grew up Dutch. This is very important because you got the character of Max, who is one of the 3 main characters of The Discovery of Heaven. So while 2 angels talk about a mission they accomplished, we're not clear about, they accomplished it. And the angel that intervenes is talking to the pure angel that doesn't intervene. And it's very, when you almost at the end where I am, it becomes very unusual. You actually someone discovers heaven, but you never expect where it is. Could you guess where heaven is according to Harry Mulisch?
I don't have a clue.
But that's what I love about this book. Every single page, you expect it to turn this way, and it turns another way you didn't expect. It's got the best twist ever I've ever read in any book. And I love where heaven is, I have to say, and how heaven was discovered and what happened to that. This person discovers heaven, and then the angels intervene, and that person is annihilated. I mean, completely. The angels actually destroy this person because it's a secret. but the way it's done is actually, that's a spoiler, but you can't really guess who does it or how it's done. But it's a minor spoiler, but I think that might make you want to read it. And that is one of the best scenes ever in the book, I find. So, but nevertheless, it starts off in the 60s. The angel has been intervening for a long time with Max's parents. So again, you got this character Max and grandparents. So he's intervened. He caused World War One. He actually made World War One happen just so Max's parents would.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, to get the parents to meet. Yeah,
crazy. It's a crazy book. Really, morally, very kind of. You think like, okay, this is going to be. These are not the usual kind of Christian benevolent angels, obviously. They're just doing this. It's all about. I find it's all about predestination. It's more Calvinist and Catholic. It's all about there are predestined, but they do have liberty, and it always is philosophical. There's always a philosophical discussion of free will determinism. That's the big thing in the book. They intervene, but the thing is, the discussions the angels have, and they have one discussion at the end of each part, 4 parts. They have one like a discussion about, it's literally divided into 4 parts, and have a discussion about what just happened. But the devil exists, Satan exists, and he gave Francis Bacon ideas that would cause people to believe themselves to be gods. That's what Francis Bacon did. If you think about it, Francis Bacon, he really brought science out there, and he kind of created this notion of everyone should work together as scientists to become the new gods, the new enlightened Renaissance gods. And this is actually in the book a concept from the devil to try to, gods. And God is there. God is not in the book so far. God is just this. He's beyond that. No one understands why God wants this to happen. What happens in the book? Not even the angels. Like engineers, but they don't know the big man. Sorry, follow me.
I'm vaguely following, but there's a lot going on.
I'm afraid that's the thing. That is only the first. That's like only the first pages, and like another 2 pages in the middle of the book. So let me get back to it. It starts off with Max and Ono. Max and Ono they're the same age, born the same year, and they happen to meet, of course, through divine intervention. It's always divine intervention happening. We've got an interesting perspective. We know more than the earthly characters, but we don't know more than the angel that intervenes, because there are several categories. So Max and Ono are best friends. All goes well. You see a lot of history from the 60s appearing, and it seems like an historical novel from the 60s. There's not. When they meet Ada, who's a cello player, Max immediately Max and her fall in love, and they start a relationship. And it's all very beautiful. Nothing special. But Max one day insults Ada unawares, doesn't realize it, and she decides that she can't be with him. This seems very simplistic, but I'm just doing a summary. There are other reasons why. In the end, she feels that he is too distant from her because he doesn't talk about his own past. Because Max is Harry Mulisch, essentially. His dad, one step further, his dad actually didn't intervene, and his Jewish mother died. So it's kind of like, it's Harry Mulisch, just one step even crazier. And so Ada leaves him, and she becomes friends with Ono. And yes, and they fall in love. So now when Max realizes this, he is, he's sad, but at the same time, he just kind of accepts it. So now you've got a change of relationship. She's with Ono. So this is all very important, because what happens then is that they go to Cuba for an adventure. Max says, let's just go for an adventure. Ada's got a concert there. She's been invited by, the Fidel Castro Cuba. So you can really see, again, it feels like you're just getting a historical novel about several events in the 60s. And that's all good, but it's not like super philosophical necessarily. So what happens then is that they're there, and some things happen which lead that Ono kind of, even though he's not a playboy and he's very he doesn't
playboy like our mutual friend, eh?
Indeed, not like him, indeed. But he has an affair with a certain Maria. And on the same day, Ada goes with Max and some other kind of revolutionary fellows. They go to a nice romantic beach and just, they spend some time there. And romance happens between Ada and Max. And they end up making love in the sea while a red moon appears in the horizon. But that is the end of part one, and the angel immediately talks to Spark of Light and says, Spark of Light, be born. I am going to create you now, and you're going to be the son of these two people. Now, this is a spoiler, but the thing is, I do want your listeners to read it. I'm not going to give too much more. I didn't realize that Anna was going to become pregnant by her ex-boyfriend. So this is and immediately starts part two. So you're immediately aware that there's a baby being born because the angel talks to a light and says, you are the savior. So literally there is a savior. And I think at the beginning it's insinuated there is a savior by Max maybe, or maybe Ono, but it's not. It's actually the kid that had to be done. And this is crazy. The angel says the kid had to be born by Max and Ada, but only when Max is not in a relation with Ada because would have otherwise used protection. It's pretty mad, actually, the twists. And Ada does, in the next part, what she does is she sleeps with Ono on the same night to make sure she has a feeling that she has like a big maternal feeling that she's immediately pregnant. And she sleeps with Ono on the same night to make sure that if she does become pregnant and she's sure of it, that she won't know, or Anna won't know, or Max won't know who the father really is. And that's the beginning of part two. So are you following it?
No, not at all.
Right, okay. Well,
there's a lot going on, and that's fine. That's fine. I'll listen back, and I'll follow it when I listen back.
Okay, so I'm going to slow down, listeners. I'm very excited about this book. This is a very difficult book to summarize.
No, don't worry. Look, take it at your pace. We'll be grand.
Okay, well, it's good that I didn't finish the book then. Part two is very different stuff. Part two is really much a thriller, strange enough, just by tone, not by content. Part one is just like, it's almost Woodhouse in some points, but still philosophical, of course, and historical. But part two doesn't bother too much about the events that are happening around. Part two is literally just about Max freaking out that his best friend is Ono, and that he also kind of feels that he made her pregnant, not Ono. They both got that intuition, I suppose. And by the way, Max was forced, Angel, to make love with Ada. There was a truly divine intervention again happening. He thinks he lost control, but actually the angel gave him basically a kind of outside worldly power to make love to her. I know this sounds mad, but just keep up with me here. Keep up.
I'm doing my best.
So, part two is just about that. So I'm not going to get through spoilers. It's all about that, but something happens, and I'm going to stop with the twist, basically. But something, again, bizarre happens. The angels intervene, and they want to make sure that Ada cannot talk anymore. That Ada becomes essentially turns into a vegetable state. There's an accident, and she's alive, but she's in a coma. And that's a dilemma because the baby is still in there growing, but she is between death and life. And the theme of euthanasia appears a lot. And there's a crazy mad twist, which I really want to say this, but this is just it's too good of a twist. Max falls in love with a certain person that's very close to Ada. Can you guess at all what the twist is? This is something completely unexpected. He falls in love.
No.
I'm not sure if I should say it. Should I say? Well,
no, you're the one who always tells me not to give spoilers, so I don't know what's happening here. No, I think you shouldn't say.
Well, let me just say this: he falls in love with someone that he shouldn't be falling in love with at all. That would be technically, I think it's almost, at least in the 60s, would have been illegal, to be honest. But he falls in love with someone. He has to keep it secret, but he realizes only with this person can he truly live and maybe become a father to the baby who doesn't know that he is father, and Ono thinks is the father. And I'm going to stop with the story because I know it's getting very confusing. But what I do want to mention is that part 3 is about the next generation. I'm not going to mention what the kid is, a boy or girl, but it becomes even crazier. And it becomes very, part 3 does become very, I would say, almost like a Jesus Christ story, I suppose. And this certain person has visions, and the end of the world is just about to appear, but in some way it will be saved. What can I say about the book? I don't want to say anything more. Why you should read this is simply because I have never thought about a book so often. And I don't think I'm doing such a great job telling the story, because to tell the story would take as long as reading the book. But all I can say is, if you're interested in euthanasia, and you're interested about the concept of good versus evil, and why evil exists, why does it exist, was evil necessary? If you think about free will determinism,
dude, this is all different topics that we studied back in philosophy class together.
I know, and this is a novel. If you're interested in the existence of incest and why it's why it's even there, or the existence of for example, euthanasia. I never thought so much about what it means to be in a comatic state. So literally, what do you do with a person who's alive, who's also possibly in pain, and who's a mother, and she's not even aware there is a child, and she's just alive, but she's not really. Her soul has departed, and the kid is just. It becomes very. It is. There's a lot of tragedy in it as well, and just Jesus, what's happening here? You know. Okay. And what I love about the angels, though, is that they do bring historical figures, and that the historical figures somehow talked with the devil, like Francis Bacon, and they do mention actually Dr. Faustus a lot, Christopher Marlowe. And I do love that. And everything related to the devil in literature, they mention a lot. He's definitely a character, but so far he has unappeared, but he's an essential character. So I get the feeling the whole time, while there's divine intervention, there is, Faustian, devilish intervention as well. So I'm wondering what's going to happen at the end. So that's interesting. As well as that, our mutual friend, Alex, to be specific, might like this. Listen to this, Alex. Max is an astronomer, while Ono is a linguist. And it does talk a lot about the philosophy of linguistics, philosophy of astronomy, and ultimately politics, actually. And you know who's a figure they talk about? There's a lot said about Hitler. And it becomes very bizarre, the philosophy. But they talk about power and why Hitler came to power. The theory is that Hitler came to power because of his physical attributes, not because of his psych attributes. So it just talks about like the attraction, negative attraction, positive, but like attraction people feel to one another, even if it's pure, like Hitler, not good. So what I do want to say, it's the story's amazing. There are so many twists and so many good things.
It sounds crazy, but good.
I can't even begin to quote the book because the whole single book is one single quote.
Wow. So you've now finished, 2-3 parts?
I finished first, second, third, and now on the fourth. So I won't get too long into it at next month, but I think there'll still be a lot to be said. So I will finish up next month. I hope.
Okay. It's almost as long as my Balzac saga.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, look, I've talked enough about it. I hope you listeners get a feeling for it. Even though I do admit I'm having difficulties even summarizing the story because I feel like there's so much to it.
Yeah.
I think my favorite part of the book is, and this might seem very controversial, but I mentioned Max has a relationship with someone he, according to society, shouldn't be having a relationship.
Yeah.
But biologically, it's not incest, but it's just wouldn't be by society. It would be inappropriate. It's not a younger person, nothing like that. It's a much older person, in fact. But I find that part of the book really, really touched me, because while they formed the most unusual relationship, he and this other woman he shouldn't really be having relationship. Again, not incest, nothing like that. Just I can't say. But the love they feel there, and they kind of do a role play. They kind of like, they pretend during the day that they don't have an intimate relationship, and then at night they have the most amazing lovemaking. And he's never made love like this to anyone before. And she is a certain woman who appears, who never expresses emotions, but she cracks twice in the book only. And it's when you get to that point, you understand why this is a vital second female person. But I think that passage, that love, and there's a scene in it where he's just walking on the beach and making a vital decision, that changes his life. Very Kierkegaard philosophical moments of just deciding he's going to be with this person and do this for his son, even though his son doesn't know that he's his father. That's a truly moving, beautiful, humane moment in the most kind of unconventional way that society would be shocked. I love this book. That's what I want to say. I'd recommend
I gather that you love it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna say. I loved it, and like the intellectual kind of discussions. I do love talking about. Talking about authors and all that. Well, Max and Anna have that all the time. All the time, Max and Anna are talking about that. So you're getting plenty of intellectual stimuli, but also the angels is truly like the stuff they talk about is, I did not know about this. So Harry Mulisch must have done a crazy, unusual amount of research in the most unusual places. They talk about some people that I've never heard of even, but then I think like, wow, I didn't know that certain person had that view at that point. And they mention Nietzsche a lot. They mention Nietzsche as a bastard. He tried to kill the boss, and it is funny at moments as well.
So, shall we move on?
Let's move on. Yes, and I just wanted to mention the Tao Te Ching reflects on the book as well. I think he was influenced by it. So that's why I wanted to follow.
I can see why you did it like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, so I just wanted to mention, guys, while we're here, between books, get over to patreon.com/booksboys. You can get all of our other shows. So in addition to the stuff that you're hearing, the monthly Books Boys, you actually get it a day early if you're on the Patreon. You can also get a t-shirt. You can recommend books for us to read. Lots of fun things. You can talk to us, but you can do that on Instagram anyway. But one of the main things is you get all of our bonus shows. So for example, since we put out our last episode of Books Boys, here's what's come out in 1 month on our Patreon. So after Books Boys episode 20, Playboys episode 14, 12th Night, with myself and Playboy Alex. Then Poetry Pals 4, The Poems of Lorca, with Mireia. Then I released some games, guys. It's a good play. I released some games, guys. You can watch me struggling to play the games that the kids like. Then Playboys Extra 3, Blood Wedding, more Lorca, and with Mireia, and then Interview from the Vault 14, The Whispering Tree, where I interviewed a musical duo 9 years ago. So like that's all in 1 month, and it's pretty consistent like that throughout each month. So you're usually getting something every week on there for like $3, $2.
And don't forget, dude, and they're usually not too short either. So they usually are between half an hour and 3/4 of an hour, right? I mean, there's a lot of content there, a lot.
Yeah. They're not as long as like Books Boys, but they're like as long as maybe one part or almost as long, So it's a lot of content, So it's worth signing up.
So
for.
I mean, I mean, we've got so much content. This could be something for you guys. I mean, you could probably for one whole month listen to. Yeah, you could definitely listen for actually maybe 2 months even.
There's like 100 episodes or more
one
on
of these
there,
episodes.
And PJ, did you know that if you count Playboy's
so they want
Extra,
3 months of daily content.
Yeah, but if you count Renaissance, then Playboy's Extra, Playboy's has caught up with Books Boys in terms of the amount of episodes. Playboy's has now caught up with Books Boys. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Plus, we've got Caper Captains,
Renaissance.
Film Fellows, and all sorts on there.
We also did Dr. Faustus, so we just mentioned it. That's why we mentioned it.
We did.
One of my favorite plays. I think we reviewed personally by Chris Romero.
There's a lot of stuff on there, and there's some more stuff coming soon. So I'm going to move on to my next book. I read a book called Canary in the Coalmines. Okay, this was a murder mystery kind of book. And basically, there's a murder, and this chap Fortunato is a private detective, and he has to try to kind of find his way. He doesn't want to be involved in this. This is by Charles Salzberg, by the way. He doesn't want to be involved in this, but he gets hired to look into a missing person. The person turns out to be dead. And then the woman has got a lover, and the husband's dead in the lover's apartment, but it's not the lover. And the lover then hires the detective to help him. And then the mafia are after them, and all this stuff happens. And it's really interesting. It's a really fun, really fun book. Oh, hold on there a second now, PJ. I think I hear the phone ringing, so bear with me just a moment. Let's see who's on the line.
Okay.
Hey, you're through to Books Boys. You got Dean on the line. Who's calling?
Charles Salzberg.
Hey, Charles. Wow, what a coincidence. We were just talking about your book, Canary in the Coalmine. So I've got a copy of it here, and I absolutely loved it. So it's great that you've called in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I was reading this, and this is exactly the kind of book I like, because I'm a big fan of that detective style stuff, crime books and everything. In my teens, I read a lot of crime stuff. John Grisham, Jeffrey Dever. In my later uni years, I read a lot of Agatha Christie, and I think I got a shelf with 75 Agatha Christie novels on it. So I love my crime book. So I was very excited about this. And I initially thought, okay, let's check it out. This is something I'm not used to, but this is not your first book. You've read a lot of books. So do you want to tell us how you got into it in the first place?
Sure. But first, let me give you a little sort of bit of trivia. I actually interviewed Jeffrey Dever.
Wow.
And Jeffrey Dever, here's the little tidbit. Before he even starts to write a book, he has to write an outline. Detailed outline that can be as much as 120 pages or more.
Wow! So the outline is almost a novella in itself.
Right. If I had to do that, and I don't know what I'm writing, I wouldn't write the book, because I would be bored with it by then.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll make this rather quick. I was an English major, which prepares you for absolutely nothing in the world, and I wanted to. Like a lot of English majors, I wanted to write the great American novel. And then I got out of school and realized no one was going to actually pay me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I stumbled into, someone said, oh, you're an English major, you like to read, maybe you should become a magazine editor. So I got a job in the mailroom at New York Magazine. And I learned very quickly I did not want to be an editor, because they all looked bored and they were there all the time, and they didn't get out. But the writers, they would roll in around 10:30. They drink coffee, they talk on the phone, they talk with the editors. They leave at noon. Around 2:30, you could smell alcohol from the elevator. They were coming back from lunch, and then they did the same thing in the afternoon, and they left at 4. And I thought, that's the job I want.
That's the one you want, yeah.
That's the one I want, the writer for magazines. And so I'm going to make this really short. I did, sell an article and became a magazine writer, journalist, having no training for it. And then that led to writing book reviews for the New York Times. And then someone asked me to ghostwrite a book with them. And then I did some nonfiction books, but I always wanted to write novels. And so I wrote this novel called Swan's Last Song. And I wrote it, now it's about 30 years ago. And at the time, it was a detective novel, but it was what a friend of mine called an existential detective novel, because in the book, the detective does not solve the crime. The crime turns out to have nothing to do with every clue he's followed throughout the whole book. And so editors and agents said, the writing is really good, but we can't publish this because fans of detective novels, they want closure. They want
the typical, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was really stubborn. I was probably in my, early 30s, maybe. And I said, well, screw you. I'm going to put it away. And then 25 years later, I started thinking about it and I went back to it and I thought, this is pretty good. If I update it, maybe publishing has changed and I can get it published. So I did. And by that time I had books published and I went to an editor and he read it and he said, I love this book, but not with this ending. So I said, okay, how about if I change the ending? And he said, yes, let me see it. Brilliant. So in 25 years, I learned how to sell out. And that was the first book. And as I was telling you before, it was nominated for a big award called the Seamus Award, which is given out by the private detective something. And I lost and said, I'm going to keep writing these till I win something. And what happened along the way is I fell in love with writing crime novels because everyone likes crime. And I don't do murder mysteries really, but although this one it's the first one where the detective has to find the murderer. There are very few dead bodies in my books, except this one. So this one was a little different and it was a challenge to me. So that's how I got into writing crime novels.
So this might have been a good one for me to start on. As someone who comes from a Agatha Christie kind of background with a lot of dead bodies, this maybe was the best one to start with then.
Yeah. But even so, I have a friend who once said to me, you with all your endings of all your books are ambiguous. You're not quite sure of what happened. And I said, yeah, that's purposeful because life is like that. I have one book called Swan Dives In, which is the same character from the first book, where you don't know what the crime is until halfway through the book. And by the end of the book, you're not even sure there was a crime. And so those are the kind of books that I kind of like to read. But this one does have a real conclusion, but still it's a little bit ambiguous.
Cool. And PJ, you've joined us.
I've joined you guys, yes.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
I'm in the worst place to be interviewing someone. Sorry, I'm in a kid's summer camp, so I've muted myself. But yeah, I was listening in a bit to what you were saying. Nice meeting you, Charles.
Nice meeting you.
Yes, glad you could join us.
And you're in Italy?
I'm in Italy right now, yes. So it's very hot. Have you ever been?
I've never been to Italy, no.
Okay. Well, it's a lovely place. I'm getting...
it's a nice day in New York City, too, where I am.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Lovely.
Well, for the record, it's an unusually nice day here in Ireland. So
is it?
What? That can't be. So the triangle has been fulfilled. But I like the idea of I was listening in a bit of an ambiguous ending, as you were saying, that it's real life.
You're right.
I like that kind of stuff too. Yes. So I mean, I would enjoy that as well. And if someone gets, I think people are turned off because they want life to be so logical. They want to make sense out of life, but you just can't make sense.
Exactly. Really, that's what detective fiction is the world. You've got the world and it's in order, and then suddenly happens and it's thrown into chaos, usually a murder, right? And it's the detective's job to put everything together, to put the world back together and make everything good again. But the problem is the world doesn't really work like that. But that's why people like it. It solves a problem and leaves the world in a good place.
What I like about it is that our detective, Fortunato, he doesn't want to fix anything, really. He just wants to get himself out of the situation. He's kind of like, oh my God, I've been put into this situation. I'm going to do the minimum amount to get myself out of it. He doesn't care about what's going on with the dead husband and the lover and all of that and the mafia. He's just like, what's the least amount of work I can put in to divorce myself from this?
Right. It's all about him. And he's not a happy guy. First of all, he suffers from anger management problems.
Yeah,
he's got a real temper, and the other thing is he suffers from insomnia, which doesn't help the anger part. So I think that you're absolutely right, Dean. Is that's the character I wanted to create,
and I feel it's more of a realistic character, isn't it? I mean, the detectives, I think most of the time they will be wanting to go home and watch the next Seinfeld episode. Right. They don't always be there.
I see a lot of, and you see it in TV shows as well, these kind of cop TV shows, and they're like staying after hours and they really care about the case. And I think, no, this is more realistic. This guy's just like, get me out of this. How do I tick a box and say I've done the job? That's more realistic for me.
Right. It's a living to him. It's not a good living. So yeah.
And it's not a good living. He doesn't, he's not rolling in money here. He's not charging astronomical fees. Right. He's struggling for work.
Right. He doesn't even have an office. He has a desk in a friend's real estate company.
Yeah. That he might not be able to keep all year round if the firm gets busy.
Right. That's right. If it gets busy, he's out on the street.
Well,
putting in the hard graft. I want to ask you about the other character, Travis, a little bit, because I couldn't figure him out. I couldn't figure out, at times you think he knows a little bit more, but he's not telling Fortunato. But then I couldn't figure out, well, is he being sneaky or devious, or is he just not that bright? And he doesn't realize what it's important to tell and isn't connecting the dots. He's not a detective. He wants to go down more artistic routes, So maybe he's just not that bright. What's your take on that? Is it meant to be ambiguous, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, don't you think most people are ambiguous? And you've actually paid me a compliment, because I try to write characters that are real and complicated. And the thing that the best way for me, I think, to look at someone like Travis is, and I don't want to defame an entire industry, but most actors, and that's what he is, a wannabe actor, have narcissism problems.
Let's a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. As my friend Charlie Shulman, who's a playwright, once said to me, he said, "Don't ever date a woman with a headshot." And so, so they are complicated. So I think you've hit all the things. He's not that bright, but he's also, he can be cunning.
Yeah.
He's not a fool, but if you took his IQ test, he wouldn't, he'd be average. But there are a lot of average people running around.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And my favorite, so we don't really meet the husband, obviously, Donald. He's worse for wear when we first see him, let's say. But the wife, Lisa, I love her because she's got that sort of, she's got a bit of a don't mess with me attitude, but also that entitled rich girl attitude at the same time. And you always know that she's devious. With Travis, I was thinking, well, is he devious or is he just not that smart? With her, I'm thinking she's very smart and very devious, and she knows what she's doing.
Right. And she will get away with whatever she can.
Yeah.
And the two things about her that should tip readers off is she hires him to find her husband dead or alive. So right away, she's admitting that he might be dead.
And she doesn't seem very bothered by it either.
No, not at all. She just doesn't want to be blamed for it if he is. And the other thing about it, and I'm not really giving anything away because it's not a big plot thing, is she pays him because he does find her husband. I won't say how, but she pays him with a bad check. So the check bounces. So there's that sense of entitlement, which you mentioned, Dean, and that's the tip-off, is that sense of, I can do anything I want. I don't have to pay you, So she is. She's much more. You know who she is, and I'm sure that people know people like that. Whereas some of the other characters are much more difficult to pin down who they are and what they want. Yeah,
you know who she is, but she's also not an out-and-out villain,
No.
Where the only real villain, I suppose, is the Albanian mob. They're the only ones that are true bad guys.
And boy, are they bad. Boy, are they bad.
Oh, yeah, they're very bad. They're very, terrifying everyone. But at the same time, they're also not main characters. So the main
Right.
three characters are really
Right.
just trying to sort their own lives out, and they just
They're
happen
there
to be...
right. They're there to propel the plot forward.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
They're there to propel the plot, and the main guys are really... Is it fair to say that all three of them are just selfishly motivated? Like, they're just trying to sort their own life and get untangled from this web.
None of them will, there'll be no statues like for Martin Luther King or Gandhi. They're not out for to help humanity, that's for sure. But I think, I hate to be cynical, although I am. Most people are more like that. It's what's in it for me.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, survival, right? Yeah, totally.
And let's ask you the next thing that everybody always... I like to ask every author, but what's next? Like, have you started into the next book, or is it time for a break?
Yes, well, I finished one that I had a novel. It's actually my favorite one. It's called Second Story Man, and it's about a master burglar who is actually a combination of two real-life burglars. One was called the Dinner Time Bandit because he only hit houses during dinner time. Because A, he knew that the valuables would be there, and B, he knew everyone would be down having dinner, and he would, he was a second story man. He would climb up and steal it.
Come in from
and
the top.
The other guy is called the Silver Thief. He only stole really high-end silver. So I created this character who is really about, to me, the book is about America's obsession with winning and being the best, and what can happen when you're like that. And anyway, so Francis Hoyt is his name, and two people get together to bring him to justice. One is a former Connecticut state investigator, and the other is a Cuban-American Miami detective, a cop. But anyway, the reason I mentioned that is that book ended, and I started to think after I wrote Canary, what happens to Hoyt, the burglar, after Second Story Man ends. And so I thought, that's worth a book, just because I want to see what he's like. He's not a likable character at all.
Right.
And so the book that's coming out in April is called Man on the Run. And I don't like to call it a sequel. It's kind of a continuation of Second Story Man. And the one I'm working on now is a character who has a touch of ESP.
Okay. And a little bit of social commentary by the sounds of things as well, which is good.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So
we like a bit of that, don't we, PJ? So the final question that we ask on every interview is if there was any existing book that you wish you had been the person to write, what would it have been?
Easy, Lolita.
Oh, right. Now, PJ, you've read Lolita, haven't you?
No, I haven't read Lolita, actually, but no.
Highly recommend.
But I've not read it the whole time.
It's
why would you recommend one?
Because the writing is so incredible, and the wit, and the whole idea of it. You'll see when you read it, and I highly recommend it. And this was written by a guy whose native language was Russian. Probably his second language was French. Okay. And English was probably his third language. His use of language, puns, and allusions is so incredible. You can read that book 10 times and get something new out of it. So if I could have written, and there are other books that I would have liked to have written by favorite authors, but that's the one that's the most intricate and at the same time the most accessible.
Okay. I've not read it, but many people have recommended it over the years,
And I believe Nabokov translated it's his own book back into Russian because he thought he could only get the essence of it in his native tongue. That's what I read, at least. So.
Fascinating guy.
It's in my never-ending queue of books that I need to get to one day.
Right, he wrote a book because he taught at Cornell, and he wrote a book called Penin, P-N-I-N, which is about a college professor that's very much like Nabokov was.
Mm-hmm. Well, We've got about a minute
wow.
or so left here, so why don't you give us a plug? Where's your website or Amazon, or where can people go to get the book?
Okay. You can get all my books on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. And my website, which I did not do, but a friend did, CharlesSalzberg.com, is really fun because you go there and Swan, one of my characters, has a desk and it's interactive. And we also did 3 or 4 short videos of Henry Swan from the books. And my friend Ross Clavin did the Henry Swan voice. So it doesn't cost anything. You don't have to buy a book, but I suggest you go to the site.
Play around on the site. See, you're just showing off now. Our website looks like it came out of the 90s. We are...
Again, I had nothing to do with it. I have a really quick website story to tell you. Can I do it really quick?
Sure.
Okay. So I was invited down to Australia, never been there before, for the International Crime and Justice Festival. And I was the guest of honor. And I went on a radio show down there. And I'm coming back from the show on the trolley, the tram, and I'm with the guy who sponsored me. And I look at my email, and there's an email for me from someone I don't know. And I open it up, and it's from a woman. She says, "Hi, I just heard you on the show, on the radio show, and I thought you were great. And then I went to your website. This was a different website, and I think it's ugly. It's really ugly."
No.
And I showed the email to Simon, and he started to laugh. And he said, "That's Australians. They're really nice, but they're really direct, and they will tell you what they think." So just to figure, I went to her website, Dean, and boy, that was really ugly. No wonder she didn't like mine.
Ugly in a different way, right? Just
yeah. But anyway, I take no credit for my website, but it's really fun to go to because she did a great job.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for calling into the show. We had a great time chatting to you, and I absolutely love the book. So I'm going to keep an eye out and try and maybe get 1 or 2 more when I have the chance.
Take care. Thanks a lot.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there we go. Charles Salzberg calling in unexpectedly. Seems to happen to us a lot. Guys, go get his books. Check out his website.
Nice.
So I'm going to mention real quick some of the stuff that you can get on our Patreon here because it is relevant. I read it this month. I read 4 plays by Federico Garcia Lorca. 2 of them you can hear the full reviews on Playboys Extra, and that's La Casa de Bernarda Alba and The Blood Wedding and Bodas de Sangre. So if you want my thoughts on those, go check those out. But I also read Yerma, about a girl who's barren. But her husband keeps telling her it's okay. Like, it's not that worried about having kids, but she can't, the societal pressures won't let her accept that, And also Doña Rosita, the spinster, she falls in love with, I think it's her cousin, but basically he goes away and says, "Don't worry, I'll come back for you in a few years once I've earned some money." And then, the letters stop coming. And then all of a sudden he sends a letter and says, "Oh yeah, I married someone else like years ago." So, and so that's sad.
These are all Federico Garcia Lorca plays. I also like, because I also read them, and they're classic Spanish plays. With reflections on the Civil War in Spain. So give it a try.
It's a sad little society, though. Like, it's very, because one thing I never understand is he's writing around the same time as Agatha Christie he's writing about Poirot. But this is a very different world. Like, it's a lot more rural. It's a lot more, I don't want to say backwards, but it seems less developed than, say, Poirot's world, and it is the same time period, But it's a lot more rustic.
It's a very conservative time in Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But they're very good. I love the poems and I love the plays. So Lorca, top notch. And I have a bookmark that says "Me vuelves Lorca," and I love it.
Nice.
So, and also, I just did a Playboys Extra on Ramón del Valle Inclán, Luces de Bohemia. So, Lights of Bohemia.
Also a good play that I enjoyed. Yeah.
Yeah, a Galician author, which was nice for me to experience because I have an affinity for Galicia. And go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
He's one of the main modernist writers from Galicia. I'm saying that Ramón Valle Inclán is one of the main modernist authors from Galicia at the time. After I was a huge peer, it's a la Tolstoy, and it's a great book about Max Treya, a blind person.
A blind poet,
I love it.
It's a little bit picaresque as well. You know, it's this blind poet going around the town, getting involved in different misadventures. It's a fun one. It's a fun one.
Yeah. If you like Ulysses, guys, if you like Ulysses, the night scenes, especially the play setting scene, you will love this. You will get that if you like Ulysses. So, and yet at the same time, a lot more readable. So it's a great play.
Also,
and actually, like Bloomsday, they actually celebrate the Bohemia once a year in Spain, where people go out and act like Max Estrellas and like Bohemians.
I did not know that. Wow.
There's actually an event. Yeah.
Do you know when?
So Spain has got its own Bloomsday, but what's that?
Do you know the date or the month even?
When is it?
Yeah. Oh, I've caught you off guard. You weren't prepared for that.
Well, yes, I'm afraid not. I can't remember. I think they changed the date as well. It was a bit even more confusing. But it's an equivalent of Bloomsday, literally, when I heard about it, because that's all they do. They just walk around nights and I think they smoke cigars and act like Max Estrellas and the people he meets. Yeah. So, great play. Really inspired by Ulysses. So I recommend that to you, Dean, as well. Really.
Yeah, I know. Okay. We've been there.
You keep putting that off, that book. I don't know why. I love that book.
So the next book I read, there's history has been made because for the first time since we started this show, I did not finish a book. This is Mario Vargas Llosa, La Guerra del Fin.
And something more unusual happened today was very.
I was also late today for the first time. Yeah,
this is. I usually am the one late, so I don't know what's happening to the universe. Angel is intervening.
Yeah, this book. So the La Guerra del Fin del Mundo, right? So the war of the end of the world, I guess. I mean, it's not that long. Like it's 450 pages, although again, very, very small text and very little dialogue with it being a Latin American book. It's a very slow pace. And, you know, reading in Spanish I can do, but the book has to be interesting. So when you take a book in a foreign language, you couple it with very little dialogue and just lots of endless description and slow pacing. And then you make it about war, my least favorite thing to read about or to watch about. I just couldn't do it, man. Like I made it more than halfway, about 3/5, and I just couldn't.
I feel like history is repeating itself. You're loving a Wilkie Collins novel and you're criticizing a Latin American novel once again. And I am the one who loves Latin American literature. I even prefer it to mainland Spanish literature, I have to be honest. So it's interesting that we have sometimes these different views, and you readers, just like I think comic is a literary art. You have your other opinions. It's good, I think, that we have this still clashes.
Yeah, you think comics are literary art, and I know that they're not. So,
and let's mention it. The world of the War of the End of the World is written by Mario Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian writer who won the Nobel Prize in, I think, 2010. And almost became, I don't know if you know this, but he almost became, I believe, either Prime Minister or President of Peru. Did you know that?
Oh, wow, no, I didn't know. Wow, okay.
He got Fujimori, Alberto Fujimori became the president instead. It was very kind of sad because Mario Vargas Llosa was the progressive one. Fujimori, of Japanese descent, was actually really the really conservative one and started kind of I think he called it a yellow party, and it was not a good time for Peru. And this is interesting. I just want you to know this because when you read Mario Vargas Llosa, he comments about that time as an author, but nevertheless he almost actually managed to become the president of the whole country. So that's a pretty big feat, you know.
Cool. So
and I love his first novel. So tell me about this one now.
No, I don't know anything about it, man. It was so boring. It was taking me like half an hour to read one page, and then at the end of the page I wouldn't even remember what had happened. Like I was so bored. I just could. I mean, it's about Brazil essentially. It's set in Brazil, and they talk about it's the army, and Brazil is going to become a republic. And the only bit I remember is one of the guys issues a proclamation that they have to be civilized, and none of the army are allowed to violate the women and this kind of stuff. Then it just goes on and on with nothing happening, and my God, I couldn't do it. Like I have no idea what this book's about. It was the worst thing I've read in months, man.
What? You're criticizing my dear friend. Again, I'm a big fan of Llosa. However, I would say this to you, Dean. I had tried to read. I had tried to read. My grammar mixed up now. I tried to read one modern Llosa book a few years ago, and I couldn't do it. So I'm wondering if his style did change. I do love his first novel, La Ciudad y los Perros.
Yeah, the famous.
It's in our first. It's in first Books Buzz episode. People, if you want to listen back. But it is, to be honest, very little dialogue, extremely experimental. You do need to be attentive, I would say, is the word for his book, just to even know who's talking. Is the way he writes. You don't not even clear who's talking. But I highly enjoyed it, nevertheless. And Latin American literature does use little dialogues, unless you're Luis Sepulveda. Maybe there are a few exceptions, but most of them love their experimental.
Once we got to the halfway mark, it started to use a bit more dialogue, but it was too late. Like, it was just. And to be fair, I also don't like war books. Like when I read War of the Worlds, even I got bored. I don't, and it's not. Where's the romance? No. It's not what Wilkie Collins is talking about. So it's just not for me. No. So it gets a no out of 5.
Oh no! Well, what? Okay. Well, anyway, so I love Llosa, but I can't say for this book.
So
I'm sorry that once again you've been disappointed by Latin American literature.
I'm done with it. I am done with it. But
and you still haven't read. But you still haven't read quintessential novel, which is 100 Years of Solitude, which Llosa himself. Llosa was so impressed by that he wrote a whole book. No, you have to get it. Llosa wrote a whole book just about the 100 Years of Solitude. He actually wrote a whole non-fiction
because we really need that, right? We really need that.
He also wrote a big non-fiction book just about Madame Bovary, the novel by Flaubert. He was a huge fan of that. He thinks that's the first
with no dialogue, right?
Novel. Okay.
I'm going to stop you there because
I find myself shocked.
We have 2 coincidences which I'm going to mention, just because you mentioned Madame Bovary. Okay, so that's the first coincidence. The next book I read was a Flaubert book, Gustave Flaubert.
Oh, there you go.
Salammbô. And here's the second coincidence, right? I'm thinking this is
intentional.
I'm thinking this is going to be like Madame Bovary. It's not.
Yeah.
It's more like Guerra del Fin del Mundo. This is another war book.
Oh, no.
I was so sad.
Oh no, I'm very sorry, Dean.
I couldn't believe it. And again, I read it in Spanish. And there's more dialogue, so it was easier. It was also a shorter book. And I finished it. But it was also boring. More stuff about war. It's set in Carthage, though, so the ancient history ties interested me, during the First World War.
Yeah.
So that was good.
Yeah, that's what you study philosophy and ancient history, just so your listeners say.
So I studied mostly Greek and a bit of Roman, but this is not what I expected from Flaubert, and this was sent over in the care package from Valerie the Pigeon Detective. It's been on my shelf for over a year, and I finally read it. And this is... here's what happens. Salammbô is this girl. She's the daughter of a kind of a leader in the community. And there's this guy, Matho and Spendio, and they're both, essentially they were slaves, but they're now commanding army legions somehow. But basically, Matho loves her to the point of distraction. It's a lot of, I want you, I need you, I'll die without you, really obsessive stuff. And they go in and they steal the Zimph, which is this, it's like a tunic or a fleece. It's almost like Jason the Argonauts here. They're stealing the golden fleece kind of things. They steal this kind of fleece or this cloak or something, and it's it's important to the people, right? So then Salammbô was asked to go and get it back. And I'm giving the first half really, really bored me with a war. There's a lot of battle scenes, but then it picked up in the second half and I started to enjoy it more.
His name is Cilantro.
So the girl's name is Salammbô. And the guys are Spendio and
Cilantro.
No. Yeah. But essentially, there's also
I thought you said cilantro as in corianders, man.
Oh, right. No. There's some sad bits where, for example, they eventually get this girl in the tent, and the high priest says to her, "You got to get the fleece back, so give up your body if you need to, but off you go and pretend you like it." And then she goes in and she has to seduce the guy who actually is in love with her, and that's very easy to do, obviously. And then it's kind of sad, what that leads to for her. And then when her community get her back, they say, "Well, thanks for the fleece, but you've shamed us, basically. So we're ashamed of you." And then her dad says, but you did get the fleece back, so I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you to this other man, and now you've got to go with him and be his wife. So she kind of gets used by multiple men, and that's kind of sad. And I don't like to see that, But this book, apparently Flaubert wrote this because the reaction to Madame Bovary was so critical. So this is, it's an immoral book that he thought, well, what's safe? I'll go with the ancients. But I don't think this is very safe.
Right, okay, interesting.
It was vaguely interesting, but I mean, I'm not going to recommend it. If you're going to read Flaubert, you're going to read something better, right? You're going to read Madame Bovary or Sentimental Education or something,
I mean, it's not famous. Madame Bovary is the famous one, yeah. And you loved that one, didn't you?
I did, yeah. This is not. Sentimental Education I loved, but this is not, anything.
Yes.
But it's fine. It was fine. It was okay. Right, okay. It was okay. But that's me done with all my books. Have you got any more, PJ?
Well, I want to mention, yes, one book I read. This one is a very readable book, and I just sadly, disappointedly, this is not on purpose, although I know I do this often, but it's a book that hasn't been translated into English. So I keep recommending books that haven't been translated into English. So, but I genuinely thought it was because it's a Japanese book that I bought in Spanish almost exactly a year ago. It's by an ophthalmologist, so someone who cures eyes, someone who has eyesight, optician, called Rui Hiramatsu, and it's called Mejora tu vista en 3 minutos. Improve your eyesight in 3 minutes. Gimnasia visual para tener una vista de águila. So I recommend the book Improve Your Eyesight in 3 minutes by Rui Hiramatsu. Given an exercise every day that takes about 3 minutes, although you could extend it up to maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And you improve your eyesight in 4 weeks with simple exercises. The most common one being patches, basically, that you look at and you have to decipher. So there are perhaps 10 to 100 different patches on a page, and only of them will be identical, and you have to look for them. It's blurry. The point is that you're improving your eyesight because it's blurry and because you have to recognize the fine features. Also, different eyesight activities include, for example, reading a page, other way, reading the printing backwards from behind through the page. So it's all doing exercises where you're really testing your eyesight because it's difficult to read. And so I'm going to mention this again next month. Go see how it goes from there.
Okay, well, there we go.
So we continued.
Short and sweet. That's all the books that we've read this month. And again, to anyone listening, I'm going to do my best with several hours worth of editing to turn this into a coherent show. But we are having technical difficulties this month with traveling around and things. So we've done our best, but hopefully it's not too noticeable in the final recording. But we'll be back to normal next month anyway. We're going to finish with our recommendations, and then we're going to play a song. PJ, we're going to use your latest song, The Swan. Yeah. So I very much like that with yourself and your guitarra.
The Swan.
So we'll play that. But first, our recommendations. Would you like to go first, or shall I?
You go first.
Okay. So my recommendation is not one book specifically, but it's actually Agatha Christie, and it's the Tommy and Tuppence, because nobody remembers these people. Everybody remembers Poirot and Miss Marple, and if you're really into it, you might know Mrs. Oliver. But no, these are Tommy and Tuppence. They only appear in 5 books over a 50-year period. So there's 2 in the 20s, 1 in the 40s, 1 in the 60s, 1 in the 70s.
Right.
And this is just a couple, and they're detectives together, but they had some history helping out with some stuff in the war. But the way they behave together is so fun and nice, but also funny. And they've just got this great relationship with each other, and it's very enjoyable to read. I read Partners in Crime, and I read N or M, and one of the others is called By the Pricking of My Thumbs. There's 5 altogether, and they're just very fun. So if you like your Agatha Christie's, you like your crime stuff, but maybe you haven't heard of these guys, I recommend checking them out.
What I recommend is there are so many books I recommend, but I really recommend if you want to get into philosophy in an accessible and very enjoyable way.
Complete Works of Plato, right?
Indeed, yes. Either you can read, like Dean did one summer, he did it for a whole summer, read the Complete Works of Plato, or just enjoy yourself with Thus sprach Zarathustra. Also sprach Zarathustra from Friedrich Nietzsche, by far my favorite philosophy book. And in fact, what is so enjoyable about the book is it is a novel. And though most people might not classify it as, but I would say it's a novel. And,
hold on, PJ. I don't know if you've implied that I wasn't having fun with Plato, but you've also tied back because
I did not imply that.
Zarathustra appears, of course, in Luthe's de Bohemia, so it's a very good tie-in. Professional.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Very good. Well, nothing against Plato, but I just find Zarathustra going into his cave to reflect and depression entering, and he talks about priests being black spiders, and there are dances happening, and they live like the gods. And, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening. It reads like a magic realist novel, although it's clearly also a philosophy book, because each chapter is a distinguishable critical lesson about society, extremely critical. But in Nietzsche, philosophy is called nihilism and also vitalism sometimes, meaning that loving life. So again, you've got sometimes nothing, there is no God, and sometimes, but we're going to make new gods, new values, and live life. So it's this optimism, pessimism mixture the whole time. I think it's a profoundly good book, and I did meditate on it when I read it back in Berlin years ago, going to forest and just reading it slowly and then thinking about Nietzsche and what he has to say.
Okay, I've never read Nietzsche, to be honest, so that's something on the...
I think you'd enjoy it. Very readable, because philosophy is great, but it's often just very dry, isn't it, to read? And this is he is a poet as well.
Are you sure it's dry? You don't want to just sit down with like a copy of David Hume and read about necessary connections and, for...
I think that's what everyone should do. I think that's what everyone wants to do in their honeymoon, Dean. Except if they don't want to make love. They just want to read David Hume. And,
this is funny, right? Years ago, I used to
insipid couple. David Hume famously said, "Throw the trash books into the fire."
Dude, I've got 2 books from the same set. I've got Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, which I read. That's grand. And I've got David Hume, A Treatise on Human Nature. I only ever got halfway. It's so very boring. But I used to leave it sitting out when guests would arrive. I would just sit on the coffee table, David Hume, A Treatise Concerning Human Nature or something. I was like, look, guys, I've been but just reading my David Hume again, Oh, goodness.
Oh, yeah, okay. Just for the image, kind of.
Yeah, that's it.
So I think did you just add a book that you don't recommend it? I think you just added also a book that you don't recommend.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Oh, Lord mercy.
So, guys, booksboys.com is the website. You can get links to all their other projects. Don't forget, check out all our stuff on Patreon. You can get us on Instagram and all the rest of that good stuff. And if you want to get in touch with us, booksboys@hotmail.com is where you can get in touch if you don't want to use the social media. But that is us done. Hopefully this show hasn't been too long. We'll see when I edit it. But that's everything. And we're going to play PJ's song, The Swan. So if the DJ could spin that record, nice. And we'll be back in about a month.
See ya.
got nothing amiss. I've got a miss. I've got to kiss and always bliss. I've got nothing amiss. I've got a miss. I've got to kiss and always bliss. I'm a swan. I used to be a man, but now I'm a swan, and I don't know why I'm not a man. I am a swan. I used to be a man, and I am a swan. 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 Crazy trumpet solo.
Books Boys was presented by TheDean and PJ Burke in association with Thaddeus Penguin Productions. This episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Italian Shakespeare Crickets. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at booksboys@hotmail.com or visit us at booksboys.com. The intro uses Driving in the 70s from the Of Soundtracks and Garage Bands EP by Trapdoor. And the outro uses Dog's Light by Bravo Max from the album of the same name. All music used is either podsafe or used with permission. If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/booksboys, get the show early and all of our bonus Spoof Fan the Boys shows. And you can also check out our music on Spotify or Apple Music. Thank you kindly for listening to us. Please tell your friends, and come back next time for another episode of Books Boys. Read some books! I just record this for the blooper.
I just say, like, someday it will be like, yeah, to this episode was Dean doing surgery on a monkey, while I had to do a handstand on a shark